In the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, one man dared to dream the impossible. A palace of stone and light, rising from wilderness built not for wealth, but for wonder. He was George Vanderbilt, a scholar among titans, a dreamer who believed beauty could outlast time. His vision became Biltmore, a living masterpiece carved into the soul of America.
Through war and loss, through the fall of dynasties and the storms of time, one family guarded his dream, refusing to let it fade. Today, its lights still burn, its halls still breathe, and its story still reminds us that vision, once born, never truly dies.
Subscribe to our channel to keep this legacy alive, and leave a comment to share what this story means to you.
It's Christmas Eve, 1895. Snow drifts softly across the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and behind towering iron gates stands something no one thought possible, a house so vast it defies belief. But calling Biltmore a house is like calling the ocean a puddle. Inside this colossal masterpiece lie 250 rooms, nearly twice as many as the White House. Stretching across more than 4 acres under one roof, it's a private world of grandeur, where one could sleep in a different bedroom every night for over a month without repetition.
There are 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces burning through the cold winter air. 3 kitchens work endlessly to serve guests, while beneath them a heated indoor pool gleams 70,000 gallons of warm water when most Americans still bathed in tin tubs. The house boasts a private gym, a bowling alley, and a library so immense it could cradle 10,000 books. Every corner speaks of ambition beyond measure. Yet perhaps the greatest wonder isn't its scale, but its location, not in New York, not in Newport, but deep within the wild heart of North Carolina.
It wasn't built in Newport, Rhode Island, where the rich competed to outshine one another with grand summer cottages. No, this palace rose from the wild mountains of North Carolina, surrounded by forests and mist, far from any city. The nearest major town was hours away by train. Yet this was where George Vanderbilt chose to build his dream.
They called it Vanderbilt.
Construction lasted 6 long years and required over 1,000 workers. Stonemasons from Italy, France, and England were brought in because no American craftsman possessed the expertise for what George envisioned. A special railway had to be built just to carry the endless flow of materials.
Millions of pounds of Indiana limestone arrived by train. Marble came from Italy, oak from England, tiles from Spain, every inch imported, every detail precise. The total cost reached $6 million, the equivalent of well over $200 million today. For that fortune, one could have built several universities or entire towns, yet one man chose to build a single home. When Biltmore was finally completed, it stood unmatched, and even now, more than a century later, it remains the largest privately owned residence in all of the United States.
Not just during the Gilded Age, but in the entire history of America, no one has ever built a larger private home. The robber barons of old tried, and even today's tech billionaires with their yachts and islands haven't come close. Biltmore stands alone, unmatched, untouchable, a monument to impossible ambition.
Building monuments to their own excess.
But why? Why would anyone create something so vast, so seemingly impractical, hidden in the mountains of North Carolina? And perhaps more mysteriously, how has it survived when nearly every other Gilded Age mansion has been demolished, abandoned, or turned into a museum? To find the answer, we must look to the man behind the dream, George Vanderbilt.
George was unlike any of his famous relatives. Born into America's wealthiest dynasty in November of 1862, he wanted no part in power struggles or social climbing. While his brothers, Cornelius and William, built empires and fought for prestige in New York's glittering ballrooms, George preferred silence, solitude, and the company of books.
He was shy, brilliant, and deeply private, an intellectual in a family of industrial titans. His grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, had left him a share of a fortune worth hundreds of billions by today's standards. Yet unlike the rest, George sought not to expand the empire, but to create something enduring, a living work of art that would outlast them all.
Is my railway now.
The Vanderbilt fortune was the largest private wealth in America, built by George's grandfather, the Commodore, a man who ruled over railroads and steamships with ruthless precision. He crushed rivals, amassed empires, and defined what power meant in the Gilded Age. But George inherited none of his grandfather's hunger for conquest.
While his brothers expanded the family empire, George pursued something far rarer: knowledge. By his 20s, he spoke 8 languages fluently: French, German, Italian, and even ancient Greek, learned not in classrooms, but by living across Europe. He studied art history, architecture, agriculture, and forestry, and built a personal library of more than 23,000 volumes, each one read, annotated, and loved. In a family obsessed with business, George was an anomaly, a thinker in an age of builders, a dreamer among conquerors. Society gossiped that he was odd, even foolish, for wasting time on art and books instead of money. But George didn't care. He had wealth beyond measure, and he was determined to spend it not on factories or railroads, but on something that would last: beauty, knowledge, and purpose.
As he wandered through Europe's grand estates, the chateaux of the Loire Valley, the palaces of Italy, the manors of England, he absorbed every detail: the gardens, the architecture, the way land and home formed a single vision. Somewhere along those journeys, a dream began to take shape. What if he could bring this grace to America, not a mere imitation, but a creation of his own? A place that would blend European refinement with American innovation, a living masterpiece of art, nature, and intellect.
By 1888, at just 26, George Vanderbilt first arrived in Asheville, North Carolina. The small mountain town was known for its clean air and mild climate, a place where doctors sent patients seeking relief from illness. His mother, Maria, came for her health, but George saw something far greater hidden within those mist-covered peaks. Standing on a ridge overlooking the French Broad River, surrounded by the endless blue silhouettes of the mountains, he felt what New York had never given him: peace, possibility, and the freedom to create something extraordinary. Where others saw isolation, George saw a blank canvas waiting for his vision. The land around Asheville was desolate, stripped bare by decades of logging and farming. The forests were gone, the soil exhausted, the fields abandoned. Locals called it worthless, but George saw life where others saw ruin. Quietly and respectfully, he began to buy.
A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Vanderbilt.
He purchased the land piece by piece, paying fair prices to local farmers, a rare act of integrity for a man of his wealth. Over time, his holdings grew to 125,000 acres, nearly 200 square miles. To his family, it seemed madness, all that fortune spent on what they called empty dirt. But George knew exactly what he was building. While his brothers were buying railroads and banks, George was quietly buying soil in North Carolina. They mocked him for wasting his inheritance on barren land, but George knew exactly what he was doing. He hired a young forester named Gifford Pinchot, fresh from studying in Europe, to restore the landscape. Together, they planned to replant forests, revive rivers, and create America's first example of scientific forestry, turning desolation into renewal. At the heart of his vast new estate, on a ridge overlooking the French Broad River, George envisioned a true home, not a seasonal retreat like his brother's Newport cottages, not a city mansion for social display, but a year-round sanctuary where beauty, nature, and knowledge could coexist. To bring his vision to life, he commissioned Richard Morris Hunt, the nation's most celebrated architect, famed for designing the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty and the opulent mansions of New York's elite. When Hunt asked what style George desired, the answer came instantly: a French Renaissance chateau inspired by the great estates of the Loire Valley, grand enough to house his art, his books, and his dreams. Hunt hesitated at first. The site was remote, the scale staggering, the logistics nearly impossible. But George had both the will and the wealth to make the impossible real. In 1889, at just 27, unmarried and without heirs, he began construction on a 250-room palace built not for status, but for the soul. His family called him eccentric, certain he'd die alone in a mountain fortress surrounded by books. They couldn't imagine that the home he built would endure for more than a century long after their own legacies faded into history.
The vision was audacious, a French chateau rising in the mountains of North Carolina. When architect Richard Morris Hunt first stood on that windswept ridge, studying George Vanderbilt's plans, he must have wondered whether his client was a genius or completely mad. Perhaps, as he later admitted, it was both.
Hunt, the first American trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, instantly understood what George wanted. Not an imitation, but an authentic Loire Valley chateau transplanted into the Appalachian wilderness. George demanded precision, elegance, and truth to the French Renaissance style, not a pale American copy, but the real thing. The final design drew from the great chateaux of Blois, Chenonceau, and Chambord, steep roofs, ornate dormers, soaring towers, and a limestone facade gleaming pale against the forest. Yet Hunt did more than copy. He adapted the spirit of old Europe to the ambition of a new nation, creating something uniquely American in scale and imagination.
The house stretched nearly 800 feet, end to end, longer than 2.5 football fields, its walls built from millions of pounds of Indiana limestone. Every block was quarried, numbered, and carried by train to Asheville, then hauled up a private railway built solely for Biltmore. Each stone fit with mathematical precision, locking into place to hold the colossal structure that would soon become America's grandest home.
What made Biltmore revolutionary wasn't just its grandeur, but its brilliance beneath the surface. From the outside, it looked like a medieval castle, but inside, it was the most technologically advanced home of its age. George demanded every modern innovation the 1890s could offer: electricity, powered by the estate's own generator, central heating through miles of steam pipes, and hot and cold running water in every one of its 43 bathrooms. The kitchens featured mechanical refrigeration. The house had fire alarms, an internal telephone and intercom system linking servants' quarters to the main rooms, and even multiple elevators, so no guest would ever need to climb stairs. George deliberately blended the romance of the old world with the progress of the new, beauty from the past, comfort from the future.
Day after day, the stonemasons chipped away.
But to build something so extraordinary required craftsmen of equal genius. Dozens of Italian stonemasons carved the limestone facade by hand, shaping every arch and gargoyle. French artisans molded ornate plaster ceilings. English woodworkers crafted the carved oak walls, and Spanish tile masters laid patterned floors that would endure for centuries.
This bread is the best thing I've tasted all.
These European specialists lived on the estate during construction, forming a community high in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Together with American workers, they built more than a mansion. They created a living school of craftsmanship, where artistry and precision fused to make something no machine could ever replicate.
In many ways, Biltmore became a living school of old-world craftsmanship in a new-world setting. The work was relentless, remember. This was 1889. There were no cranes, no modern tools, only pulleys, scaffolds, and the raw strength of human hands. Winter slowed construction but never stopped it. George's determination would not allow it.
Guided by the master's hand.
Steady now! Hold it there, lads!
Every detail was an obsession. The banquet hall rose 70 feet high, its ceiling supported by hidden steel trusses, disguised as medieval timber. The library's carved oak ceiling demanded months of perfect carpentry. Stained glass windows imported from Europe were custom-fitted to each arch, and George personally approved every hinge, tile, and light fixture. Richard Morris Hunt once said, working with George was both a dream and a nightmare. A dream because his client had flawless taste and infinite means. A nightmare because good enough never satisfied him. Cost didn't matter, only perfection did. If a design fell short of his vision, it was redone, always.
Beyond the house, George's eye turned to the land itself. He brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, the creator of Central Park, to shape the surrounding wilderness. At first, Olmsted doubted the barren soil could ever recover, but George's faith changed his mind. Together, they designed something revolutionary, a self-sustaining estate where beauty and productivity lived side by side.
A tapestry of forest and field.
Olmsted carved a 3-mile approach road that curved through the forest, revealing the chateau bit by bit like a slow unveiling. He created Italian gardens, walled gardens, and shrub gardens filled with thousands of imported plants. Beyond them stretched farmland, nurseries, and restored forests, a landscape of order and grace that would make Europe proud and America hopeful. George never set out to build just a mansion. He wanted a living, breathing estate that worked as beautifully as it looked. Inspired by the great manners of Europe, Biltmore would feed itself, There were dairy herds for milk and cheese, orchards heavy with fruit, vineyards on the hillsides, and vegetable gardens supplying the kitchens. Even the barns, coops, and stables were part of his grand design for self-sufficiency.
Careful balance.
Through 6 years of relentless toil,
6 relentless years passed. Every day brought more stone, more wood, more detail. By the time Biltmore was complete, George had spent $6 million, an unimaginable fortune at the time. And that was only for the house itself, not the land, the farms, or the forestry work. His family was appalled. For that sum, they said, he could have bought entire railroads, founded banks, built industries. But George wasn't chasing profit. He was building permanence. While his brothers built empires that would crumble with the next market crash, George was creating something timeless, a monument to art, craftsmanship, and peace. On Christmas Eve of 1895, he opened the doors for the very first time. His family and friends stepped inside and were struck silent. Before them stood the impossible, a French chateau rising from the heart of the Carolina mountains, more magnificent than anything in New York, Newport, or even Europe itself. Now, imagine you were one of those guests arriving that night. After the long train ride and carriage journey through Olmsted's winding approach road, you would emerge into the open and see it at last, towers piercing the winter mist, windows blazing with golden light. The snow would crunch beneath your feet as the great doors swung open, and for a moment you'd believe you'd stepped into another world. You've arrived after a long journey from New York, your train winding through mountains before a carriage carries you along the 3-mile approach road Olmsted designed. Through the bare winter trees, you glimpse towers and rooflines rising in the mist. Then suddenly, the forest parts, and there it is, immense, unreal, breathtaking. Your carriage halts at the grand entrance, and even before stepping inside, the sight overwhelms you. The limestone facade climbs 4 stories high, its pale walls crowned with gargoyles staring down from the roofline. The entrance tower soars above them all, a sentinel of stone and light. Though you stand in North Carolina, it feels as though you've been whisked to the Loire Valley of France. Then the heavy doors open, and you step inside.
Your first glimpse of the interior isn't a parlor or grand hall, it's a garden. The winter garden. Sunlight filters through the glass ceiling onto palms, ferns, and exotic blooms. A fountain ripples softly in the center, its sound echoing against tile floors patterned like a mosaic. You are indoors, yet it feels like standing in a sunlit courtyard. The space is serene, strange, and utterly enchanting. From there, you're led to the banquet hall, and language begins to fail you. The room stretches 70 feet long and 40 wide, its vaulted ceilings soaring the height of a 7-story building. The walls shimmer with 16th-century Flemish tapestries, each worth a fortune. At one end stands a triple fireplace, 3 great arches of stone large enough for a man to walk into. A vast oak table gleams beneath the chandeliers, ready for 64 guests. Above, steel trusses are hidden behind carved wood and plaster, proof of modern engineering disguised as medieval grace, a perfect union of beauty and innovation.
Every corner of Biltmore reflected George's philosophy. Beauty must serve purpose, and purpose must serve art. The banners hanging high above the banquet hall weren't mere decoration. They were real battle flags collected from European regiments, each carrying centuries of history. Even the great wrought iron chandeliers were marvels of design, crafted to appear medieval, yet wired for electricity, glowing to life with a single switch when most homes still flickered by candlelight. From the hall, guests would wander into George's sanctuary, the library, 2 stories high, lined floor to ceiling with carved walnut shelves and filled with 10,000 volumes from his personal collection. Above, a painted ceiling depicted mythic scenes, while tall windows poured light over plush reading chairs and a marble fireplace. These weren't books for display. George had read them all in French, Italian, Greek, and more. It was a scholar's retreat, not a showpiece. Next came the music room walls draped in rich tapestries, a grand pipe organ built into the architecture, and furnishings arranged for intimate evenings of conversation and performance. It was a salon in the truest sense, a space for art, thought, and friendship, echoing the refined gatherings of Europe's nobility. The breakfast room glowed with Albrecht Dürer prints and custom china. The billiard room, paneled in Spanish leather and carved wood, carried the scent of tobacco and polish. Each room was a world of its own, distinct, deliberate, alive. But Biltmore's true genius shone in its comforts. 43 bathrooms, each with hot and cold water, porcelain fixtures from Europe, heated towel racks, and tiled floors that would impress even today. Most Americans still relied on outhouses, but George's guests bathed in elegance.
Defined by rigid social structures, the private bath chamber offered a sanctuary. The Biltmore
And then there was the swimming pool, an indoor marvel with underwater lighting, a first for its time. The Roman-inspired chamber shimmered with elaborate tilework, holding 70,000 gallons of heated water. Beside it stood a gymnasium, where guests could exercise before slipping into the warm, glowing pool. Luxury and modernity, perfectly balanced beneath a mountain of stone.
Knew no bounds. The gymnasium was a marvel, yet the labor remained.
It was 1895, long before fitness became fashionable. Yet George was already embracing the idea of well-being. Beneath the grand halls lay a fully equipped gym and a proper bowling alley. Not a novelty with a few lanes, but a handcrafted gallery of polished wood, custom-made pins, and engraved balls. Nearby were rooms dedicated to hunting gear, a gun room displaying hundreds of rifles and shotguns like museum pieces, and vast wine cellars where thousands of bottles rested at perfect temperature.
The servants' quarters reflected George's sense of respect and order. Running a home this vast required an army, nearly 80 staff at its height, but their accommodations were humane and comfortable. Each servant had a private room, a rare luxury in that era. There were dining halls, sitting rooms, and even a laundry with modern washing machines. It was a world within a world, built to sustain the rhythm of the great house above.
Keep those pots moving, we need more steam.
The 3 kitchens were marvels of modern engineering: gas stoves, mechanical refrigeration, running hot and cold water, and enough space to prepare elaborate meals for dozens of guests. Food, linens, and logistics flowed like clockwork through hidden corridors and service stairs, yet for all its grandeur, Biltmore never felt sterile or untouchable. The chairs invited you to sit. The fireplaces glowed with real warmth. The bedrooms were places to rest, not merely to impress. George had built not a monument, but a living home, one meant to comfort, to inspire, to welcome.
Find the tray. Careful now.
Still, no beauty could function without the people behind it. 80 servants formed the heartbeat of Biltmore, unseen but indispensable. They didn't clock in and out, they lived there, their lives woven into the fabric of the estate. At the top stood the house steward, the unseen commander who kept the vast domestic machine running like a symphony, ensuring that George Vanderbilt's world of effortless grace never missed a note.
Beneath the house steward, a complex hierarchy kept Biltmore alive. The butler reigned over all male servants, managing the dining room and the rituals of formal service. The housekeeper oversaw the female staff, ensuring that every inch of the home from bedrooms to staircases remained spotless. These two figures wielded real authority. They hired and dismissed staff, set daily schedules, and upheld the discipline that kept the great machine running without flaw.
Below them came the specialists, the quiet experts, who made refinement seem effortless. The ladies' maids tended to the female guests, pressing gowns, styling hair, and anticipating every whim. The valets served the men, laying out clothes, drawing baths, and polishing shoes until they shone like mirrors. In the kitchens, a head chef and several sous chefs orchestrated meals of 10 or 12 courses, supported by kitchen maids chopping, scrubbing, and washing from dawn till night. Footmen carried trays and messages, maintained public rooms, and stood ready at the ring of a bell.
And where is the fish course?
Upstairs maids kept the bedrooms immaculate, making beds, dusting furniture, and tending dozens of fireplaces before the family even stirred. Laundry maids toiled below, scrubbing endless piles of linens by hand, while outside, teams of gardeners trimmed the intricate landscapes Olmsted designed. Grooms tended horses and carriages. Farmers milked cows, picked fruit, and harvested vegetables. Foresters managed the vast woodlands, planting and protecting in line with Gifford Pinchot's pioneering conservation methods. Their day began before dawn, housemaids up by 5 to light fires in every room, cooks awake even earlier to prepare breakfast. By the time George descended the staircase, the entire estate was already humming with unseen labor. That was the mark of excellence. The work was invisible. Servants moved through hidden stairways and narrow corridors, eating in their own dining rooms below stairs. Even those humble quarters, though modest, were cleaner and more comfortable than most homes of the era, a reflection of George's quiet respect for the people who made his dream function in perfect silence.
Supporting the grand vision above.
George treated his staff well for the era. They were paid fair wages, lived in clean, comfortable quarters, and ate better than many Americans of their class. But life at Biltmore was no easy task. A housemaid might walk miles each day, climbing endless flights of stairs with cleaning supplies in hand. The kitchens, even with ventilation, were stifling. Laundry maids labored for hours over steaming tubs, 6 days of work a week, with only Sunday afternoon for rest if fortune allowed. Every servant's life followed strict order and discipline. Rank ruled everything. Senior staff dined apart from juniors. Men and women rarely mixed. In the presence of the Vanderbilts, one did not speak unless spoken to, never met their eyes, never voiced complaint. The best servants were invisible, their skill measured by silence. Yet working at Biltmore carried a rare prestige. It meant serving one of America's wealthiest families in the grandest home ever built.
The training was exceptional. Staff learned the art of serving 12-course meals, polishing silver until it shone like glass, maintaining priceless antiques, and operating modern marvels, electric lights, elevators, even the house's complex intercom system. A reference from Biltmore's butler or housekeeper could open doors to any great estate in the country. Some stayed for decades, watching George marry, celebrating his daughter's birth and mourning his death, woven quietly into the story of the house they kept alive.
Drew to a close. Grandeur had its price.
But the cost of such perfection was staggering. Salaries, uniforms, food, housing, all consumed vast sums. Many Gilded Age fortunes collapsed under the weight of their own households. George could afford it, but even a Vanderbilt felt the strain. He poured money into forestry, farming, art, and books, while entertaining guests in grand style. Though Biltmore was meant to sustain itself, the estate devoured wealth faster than it earned it. Still, in those early years, the flow of money seemed endless. Lavish gatherings filled the halls, the finest names of the age dining beneath glowing chandeliers, never once glimpsing the invisible army who made it all look effortless. But George's days as a solitary host in his mountain palace were numbered. For all his wealth, brilliance, and solitude, love was about to step across his threshold and change Biltmore forever. In those first glittering years, Biltmore's halls echoed with the footsteps of America's most famous guests. When you own the largest and most spectacular home in the nation, people come out of awe, curiosity, or sheer fascination. Despite his quiet nature, George Vanderbilt proved to be a gracious and generous host. His goal was never mere display. He wanted his home to be a living center of art, learning, and conversation.
The legacy of these great thinkers, you see, is not just the philosophical implications are staggering.
The guest list of Biltmore read like a blend between the Gilded Age social register and an intellectual salon. These were not the idle wealthy come to gawk at luxury. They were thinkers, artists, and pioneers. George surrounded himself with minds that challenged and inspired him, seeking dialogue more than admiration.
Truly a monument to the Renaissance spirit. I designed this room to be a
Among his frequent visitors was Edith Wharton. Yes, that Edith Wharton, the novelist who would later win a Pulitzer Prize and dissect the very excesses of her age in The Age of Innocence and The House of Mirth. She and George shared a deep love for literature and European culture. You can almost picture them seated by the library fire, surrounded by 10,000 volumes, debating novels and philosophy, their words mingling with the scent of old paper and oak. Henry James also visited the writer whose works explored Americans caught between the New World and the Old. Standing in a French chateau nestled in the Carolina wilderness, he found the perfect metaphor for his stories. George wasn't flaunting wealth like so many others of his class. He was cultivating refinement, education, and taste, something James recognized as rare. Your first glimpse of the interior isn't a parlor or grand hall, it's a garden, the Winter Garden. Sunlight filters through the glass ceiling onto palms, ferns, and exotic blooms. A fountain ripples softly in the center, its sound echoing against tile floors patterned like a mosaic. You are indoors, yet it feels like standing in a sunlit courtyard. The space is serene, strange, and utterly enchanting. Still, no beauty could function without the people behind it. 80 servants formed the heartbeat of Biltmore, unseen but indispensable. They didn't clock in and out, they lived there, their lives woven into the fabric of the estate. At the top stood the house steward, the unseen commander who kept the vast domestic machine running like a symphony, ensuring that George Vanderbilt's world of effortless grace never missed a note.
Years later, Alice Roosevelt would still tell stories about Biltmore, about swimming in its glowing indoor pool, dining under chandeliers in the banquet hall, and the sheer audacity of building something so magnificent in the wilderness. Her memories weren't just of luxury, but of wonder, the sense that she'd stepped inside a dream built from stone. Among George's distinguished guests was John Singer Sargent, the most celebrated portrait artist of the Gilded Age. His brush defined the era's faces: power, elegance, ambition. Having Sargent paint at Biltmore wasn't simply social prestige, it was artistic recognition. George's home had become more than architecture, it was art itself, a creation worthy of a master's canvas. Yet Biltmore wasn't all symphonies and salons. George also hosted grand hunting parties across his 125,000 acres. Wealthy friends from New York arrived for days of sport, stalking deer, bear, and wild turkey, before returning each evening to roaring fires, long dinners, fine wines, and billiards in rooms thick with cigar smoke. The gun room, lined with hundreds of rifles and shotguns displayed like museum pieces, saw regular use.
Christmas at Biltmore was a world of its own. Ever since George opened the doors on Christmas Eve of 1895, the season became sacred tradition. The banquet hall was draped in evergreen garlands, and a towering 20-foot tree glittered beneath the vaulted ceiling. Guests from near and far gathered for music, laughter, and endless feasts, carols echoing through the winter garden under glass and candlelight. For the servants, it was the busiest time of year, long hours, endless preparations. Yet George ensured they shared in the celebration. He gave generous Christmas bonuses, fine meals, and moments of rest. It wasn't only kindness, it was wisdom. Loyalty kept Biltmore running smoothly, and George understood that true grandeur depended on the happiness of those who made the magic happen. George often hosted his family at Biltmore, though such visits could be delicate. His brothers and their wives arrived with their own quiet rivalries, comparing houses, art collections, and guest lists, as though life itself were a contest. George usually outshone them not through ostentation, but through refinement. Still, unlike his siblings, he never built Biltmore to impress. He built it for peace, beauty, and meaning. His mother, Maria Louisa Vanderbilt, was the one family member who truly understood him. She supported his dream from the beginning, even when the others called it folly. Biltmore was partly built for her, a retreat from New York's harsh winters, but fate was unkind. She visited only briefly before her health failed. She passed away in 1896, just a year after the house opened, leaving George's triumph wrapped in quiet sorrow.
By integrating these corridors, Mr. Olmsted, we ensure the
Biltmore soon became more than a home. It evolved into a center of learning and innovation. Scientists, foresters, and agricultural experts came from across the country to consult with George. These visits weren't about champagne and gossip, they were working sessions, debates about sustainable forestry, soil renewal, and the future of American farming. Biltmore became a living laboratory, a vision of how beauty and science could thrive together.
Indeed. These plots are proving the sustained yield concept.
The acoustics in this room are remarkable, almost as fine.
Evenings at the estate were alive with conversation writers, artists, politicians and scholars debating art, literature, and the new industrial America rising beyond the mountains. George had created a sanctuary for big ideas, a place where intellect, culture, and progress intertwined. Yet beneath the elegance and energy, one truth lingered. He was alone.
As he neared 40, the shy scholar of the Vanderbilt dynasty still lived without a companion or heir. His family worried. society whispered. Would the man who built the greatest home in America spend his life wandering its halls alone? Then, quietly and unexpectedly, everything changed. George met Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, the woman whose strength and grace would one day save Biltmore itself.
George Vanderbilt, a whisper from Paris.
Her name was Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, and when George met her in Paris in 1898, she was everything he wasn't confident, where he was shy, worldly where he was scholarly, warm and effortlessly social where he preferred quiet solitude. At 32, Edith was a widow of distinguished lineage, descended from one of New York's oldest Dutch families. Her first husband, an older senator, had left her comfortably wealthy and well-connected in the grand salons of Europe.
Carried herself with a serene assurance, unaware of the destiny.
George, now 40, had never met anyone like her. Their meeting wasn't about wealth or status. It was genuine affection born from shared passions, art, literature, beauty, and a deep understanding of culture. Edith could move through the social world with grace, navigating the very obligations that George had always found burdensome. For the first time, he found someone who truly understood him.
I promise to love and cherish you, George.
And I promise the same to you, my dear Edith, for all our lives.
They married in Paris that June, in a quiet ceremony with only close family and friends, no press, no spectacle, only sincerity. When the couple returned to Biltmore as husband and wife, the great house at last had a heart. Edith didn't change its architecture, she changed its life. The home George had built as a personal retreat became, under her guidance, a living, breathing estate.
See that the linens for the East Wing are aired properly before the Duke arrives.
Edith knew how to run a great house. Having travelled among England's country estates and France's chateaux, she understood the art of hospitality, the rhythm of a household, and the discipline of management. She quickly discovered what George had overlooked. Biltmore's beauty came at a staggering cost. 80 servants, 250 rooms, vast farmlands, the estate consumed wealth faster than it produced it. Even a Vanderbilt fortune could not last forever.
Gentlemen, the timber yield is under projection.
With intelligence and quiet authority, Edith began to act. She negotiated better contracts, made the farms more efficient, trimmed the staff slightly, and turned waste into order, all without diminishing the home's grace. George had built Biltmore as an artist creates a masterpiece. Edith learned how to preserve it as a steward of legacy.
From a private estate into a model of efficiency and stewardship.
Within a year, joy filled the halls in a new way. On August 22, 1900, their daughter, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, was born at Biltmore. The nurseries were no longer empty. Laughter now echoed through corridors built for silence. George, at 42, was finally a father. Cornelia's childhood was a dream, the largest house in America as her playground, 125,000 acres as her backyard. She had ponies, tutors, and her own suite of rooms. Yet Edith, ever grounded, raised her with discipline and humility, teaching her that privilege demanded responsibility. For George, these were the happiest years of his life. He had his books, his forests, his art, and at last a family who made Biltmore feel complete.
At last, Biltmore had become everything George had envisioned, no longer a monument or a retreat, but a living family home. The echo of footsteps had turned to laughter. The vast halls finally held warmth. Yet the Gilded Age had a cruel lesson for its dreamers. You could build magnificence, but never immortality. George's health, always fragile, began to decline. He was a scholar, not a sportsman, more at home with books than physical vigor. In early 1914, while in Washington, D.C., he underwent an emergency appendectomy, a routine surgery, or so it should have been. Complications arose. On March 6, 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt II died on the operating table at just 51 years old.
He had lived only 16 years in the house that took 6 years to build, and only 14 with Edith, the woman who had brought it to life. His daughter, Cornelia, was 13. Overnight, the house fell silent again, its creator gone, his wife left to face a mountain of responsibility and grief.
The estate was still losing money. The agricultural operations, though improved, couldn't sustain its vast costs. And now, the world itself was changing. War had erupted in Europe, tearing apart the genteel civilization that had inspired Biltmore's creation. The age of leisure and limitless wealth, the Gilded Age, was ending.
Edith Stuyvesant Dresser Vanderbilt, now 49, stood alone, a widow for the second time, a mother raising a teenage daughter, and the caretaker of the largest private home in America. Others in her position were surrendering, selling, or abandoning their estates as fortunes withered. Even the great Vanderbilt mansions in New York were being demolished, their grandeur swept away by modernity.
But Edith was made of stronger stuff. She had loved George deeply and understood that Biltmore was more than walls and gardens. It was his legacy, his belief that America could be cultured, self-sustaining, and beautiful. Selling was unthinkable. She would not let his dream die. Whatever it took, her intellect, her resolve, her courage, she would use it all.
And so, as the cannons of the Great War thundered across Europe, Edith Vanderbilt began her own quiet battle in the Blue Ridge Mountains to preserve her husband's masterpiece against time, debt, and the changing world beyond its gates. The fight for Biltmore's survival had only just begun. The income George left behind was vast, yet Biltmore devoured it faster than it could ever be replenished. The war in Europe only deepened the strain. Markets shifted, costs rose, and fortunes everywhere began to crumble. Edith, now head of the estate, refused to watch helplessly. She took full command. Where George had ruled with inspiration and trust, Edith governed with precision and control.
She examined every ledger, questioned every purchase, and demanded accountability at every level. Nothing escaped her notice, not a delivery, not a wage, not a repair. To some, she was intimidating. To others, she was salvation. Slowly, she made the painful cuts required for survival, reducing staff, closing unused rooms to conserve heat, and trimming the endless expenses of grandeur. The extravagant parties that once filled Biltmore's halls grew fewer. The focus shifted from display to endurance.
The new thresher should improve yield by
Edith
20%.
Expanded and modernized the estate's farms, investing in better equipment and smarter methods. If Biltmore was to live, it would have to earn its keep. Yet as she waged this financial battle, she faced another, more personal one, raising a daughter alone. Cornelia, now a teenager, had been educated within the safe, sheltered walls of Biltmore. But Edith knew the world was changing, and her daughter needed to understand it.
Against convention, she sent Cornelia to school in New York to live with relatives. For the girl who had grown up surrounded by servants and silence, the experience was a shock: crowded streets, noisy subways, and independence for the first time. But Edith was right. Cornelia needed resilience, not privilege. She needed to know the world that awaited her beyond the gates.
Independence meant facing this towering
Watch the crates there, steady now.
When America entered World War I in 1917, even Biltmore could not stand apart. The estate supplied food for the military and hosted fundraisers for war bonds. Young men from the staff enlisted and went to fight overseas. The grand dinners and glittering dances of the Gilded Age now seemed painfully irrelevant. A new world was emerging, faster, harder, and utterly changed. The age of dynasties was over, and the age of adaptation had begun.
By the 1920s, the tide had turned completely against the world George once knew. Income tax, once a token obligation, climbed sharply. Estate taxes now punished the great fortunes that had built America's dynasties, making it ruinously expensive to pass wealth from one generation to the next. The glamour that once surrounded vast country estates began to fade. This was the Jazz Age: fast, urban, and modern, and mountain palaces, like Biltmore, suddenly looked like relics from another century.
Across the Vanderbilt family, the great houses began to fall. The Fifth Avenue mansions in New York were torn down, replaced by office towers and department stores. The Newport cottages, once the symbols of summer opulence, were shuttered or sold. Even the breakers, the crown jewel of the family's seaside estates, had become a burden too heavy to bear. Edith saw it happening all around her and knew Biltmore could be next.
The estate still ran at a loss. Cornelia, now grown and married after a lavish wedding in 1924, had her own opinions about the family fortune. The weight of the past pressed heavily on them both. Then came 1929, the crash. The Great Depression swept across the nation like a tide, washing away fortunes that had once seemed unshakable. Banks closed, businesses failed. Even the mighty Vanderbilts were not immune. Biltmore, with its endless staff and staggering upkeep, could no longer survive as it was.
Edith was 64. For 15 years she had fought to keep the estate alive, but now she faced an impossible choice. To preserve Biltmore, she would have to do something no Vanderbilt had ever done, something her late husband might have found unthinkable. In 1930, she made the decision. She opened Biltmore House to the public.
The Great Depression held the nation.
For $1, ordinary Americans could walk through its grand ground floor rooms, the banquet hall where presidents had dined, the library lined with 10,000 books, the winter garden where tropical plants bloomed beneath glass. It wasn't a museum, the family still lived there, but for the first time, the doors of America's most private mansion swung open to the world. It shocked society, but it saved everything George had built.
They must be centuries old.
I cannot believe they are letting just anyone in.
Society was scandalized. To open one's private mansion to paying visitors to turn a Vanderbilt home into a public attraction was unthinkable. It went against everything their name represented: privacy, exclusivity, and aristocratic distance from commerce. But Edith didn't care. Reputation meant nothing if the house was lost. She wasn't selling prestige, she was preserving legacy. George, she believed, would have understood. He had built Biltmore to inspire, to show what beauty and craftsmanship could achieve in America. Now it would serve that purpose in a new way, opening its doors so others could see what one dreamer had created.
When the first visitors arrived in 1930, they must have felt as though they'd stepped through time. Outside, the Great Depression was destroying lives, banks collapsing, families losing homes. bread lines stretching around city blocks. Yet for $1, they could enter a different world. A mountain palace of marble floors, soaring ceilings, and the faint scent of history lingering in the air. They walked through the 70-foot banquet hall, past Flemish tapestries and gilded chandeliers, imagining the laughter of the Gilded Age. For a brief moment, ordinary Americans, farmers, teachers, factory workers became guests of the Vanderbilts. But unlike a museum, the house was still alive. Edith and Cornelia lived upstairs, their private quarters closed off from public view. Occasionally, tourists caught a fleeting glimpse of them, a reminder that behind the velvet ropes, life still went on.
The experiment worked. The income from visitors didn't make the estate wealthy, but it kept the lights on, the fires burning, and the staff employed. Still, more sacrifices were needed. In 1932, Edith sold 86,000 acres, most of the surrounding forest, to the federal government. That land became part of Pisgah National Forest, one of the first national forests in the eastern United States. The decision was bittersweet.
It meant surrendering George's dream of a vast, self-sustaining estate, but it ensured that the land he had restored would remain protected forever. The sale brought in much-needed funds, helping Biltmore weather the darkest years of the Depression. By the time the Second World War arrived, Biltmore's role changed once more. Hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it became a sanctuary for priceless treasures. The National Gallery of Art, fearing bomb attacks on Washington, sent many of its most valuable paintings and sculptures to be stored safely within Biltmore's stone walls, turning George's House of Art into a fortress for the world's beauty.
During the war years, Biltmore became an unlikely fortress of art. Paintings worth millions, masterworks that today would be considered priceless, were carefully crated and hidden away inside its walls. The music room and adjoining spaces became vaults for the National Gallery of Art, safeguarding treasures by Rembrandt, Raphael, and Vermeer. For several years, this mountain estate quietly held more artistic wealth than nearly any museum on Earth. Tourism dwindled during World War II. Gasoline was rationed, and the nation's attention was elsewhere. Yet Edith, now in her 70s, never faltered. She had steered Biltmore through the Great Depression, and now she guided it through the uncertainty of war with the same resilience that had defined her life. Her hands-on leadership never wavered. She balanced books, oversaw repairs, and made sure the house remained open and dignified, even in austerity.
Cornelia, however, followed a different path. Her marriage, once celebrated in the grand halls of Biltmore, dissolved during the 1930s. Restless and independent, she left North Carolina to live abroad in Europe and later in New York. The daughter, born into privilege, longed for freedom from it. While she moved on, Edith, the outsider who had married into the family, became the true guardian of George's dream, shouldering the burden that others could not.
Edith Vanderbilt died in 1958 at the age of 92, outliving George by 44 years. For nearly half a century, she had protected his masterpiece through every hardship, imaginable: war, depression, taxes, and time itself. When she passed, Biltmore still stood, smaller, leaner, but alive and still owned by the family. The great house of the Gilded Age had not fallen.
Yet survival had come at a price. The estate was no longer the vast empire it once was. much of its land was gone, its grandeur tempered by necessity. The Vanderbilt family no longer lived there in the old style, with endless servants and glittering balls. Biltmore had become both a business and a symbol, a place where heritage met adaptation. While New York's Vanderbilt mansions were demolished and the Newport cottages turned to museums and hotels, Biltmore endured as a living home. But endurance raised new questions. Could the next generation succeed where others had failed? By the 1960s, even with tourism income, the costs of preservation, estate taxes, property upkeep, and restoration continued to climb. When George's grandson, William A.V. Cecil assumed control after Edith's death, he faced a defining choice. Should he finally sell and close this chapter of history, or reinvent Biltmore once more for a modern America that barely remembered the Gilded Age?
A delicate balance of legacy and survival.
What happened next would decide whether George Vanderbilt's vision endured into the 21st century or vanished like every other relic of the Gilded Age. The odds were grim, but Biltmore's story was never one of surrender. It was a story of survival through reinvention. Stand at Biltmore's gates today, and you'll see something that defies history. A fully functioning, family-owned Gilded Age estate, still thriving 130 years after its creation. By every logical measure, this shouldn't exist. Nearly every other mansion of its era has been demolished, sold, or turned into a museum. The Vanderbilt mansions of Fifth Avenue, gone. The breakers in Newport, donated to the Preservation Society. Marble House, a museum. Whitehall in Florida, another museum. The list of lost grandeur stretches on endlessly. Yet Biltmore remains. It is still owned by George Vanderbilt's descendants and still operated as a family business. It welcomes more than 1 million visitors each year, and somehow, despite time, taxes, and change, it remains both a private home and a public treasure. How? Through adaptation. Constant, deliberate, sometimes painful adaptation. In the 1960s, William A.V. Cecil, George's grandson, took control and understood what others before him hadn't. That sentiment alone could not save Biltmore. Tourism helped, but it was not enough. The estate needed new life, new income, new relevance. William expanded thoughtfully, ensuring every change honored the original vision.
Drafted in the mid-1960s.
For William Cecil, it was about...
He established the Biltmore Winery, transforming part of the estate into one of America's most visited wineries. Its award-winning wines, crafted using methods George himself would have admired, brought in steady revenue while deepening the estate's cultural footprint. Then came the Inn on Biltmore Estate, a luxury hotel built on the grounds, not within the mansion, giving guests the chance to wake each morning to the same misty mountain views that had once captivated George in 1888. Restaurants, boutiques, and special events followed, elegant without excess. The estate became a living destination rather than a static exhibit. Visitors now came for Christmas celebrations, spring blooms, wine tastings, concerts, and weddings. The estate's remaining 8,000 acres hosted outdoor adventures and gatherings that brought vitality back to the land.
Inside, the house itself was restored and modernized with care. Climate control systems now preserve priceless art and furnishings. Advanced fire suppression protects against catastrophe. Every room is maintained with the same devotion. George and Edith once showed proof that preservation is not just about nostalgia, but about stewardship. Through every innovation, one principle endures. Biltmore still stands because the family refused to let it become a memory. Today, Biltmore's maintenance staff remains large by modern standards, though far smaller than the 80 servants who once worked under George Vanderbilt. Their task is monumental: to preserve every inch of the house as it appeared in 1895. Day after day, they polish, repair, and restore, ensuring the estate still breathes with the same quiet grandeur it held on the night it first opened. The banquet hall still stuns visitors, its vaulted ceiling soaring above long oak tables and flickering firelight. The library still shelters thousands of books, many once handled by George himself. The winter garden remains alive with tropical plants, its fountain murmuring softly beneath the glass dome. Even the indoor pool and bowling alley, silent relics of a vanished world, gleam as though awaiting their next guests. Every room stands as a tribute to craftsmanship that refuses to fade.
Yet what makes Biltmore extraordinary today is that it isn't trapped in amber. The estate isn't a museum curated by strangers, it's a living home. George Vanderbilt's descendants, now in their 5th generation, still reside on the property and remain actively involved in its management. Biltmore continues to be a family enterprise, guided by the same mixture of pride and practicality that has sustained it for more than a century. Its modern success rests on a delicate balance of preservation and innovation. Tourism remains the lifeblood of the estate, over 1 million guests each year, whose admission fees help fund ongoing restoration. The winery thrives, its wines sold nationwide. The inn and hotel bring in travelers seeking the luxury of the Blue Ridge. Weddings, conferences, and seasonal celebrations fill the grounds year-round. Together, these ventures create a financial model that allows Biltmore not merely to survive, but to prosper.
Still, the challenges are relentless. Property taxes on 8,000 acres of prime land are immense. The mansion itself, a masterpiece of stone and steel, demands constant upkeep. From roofing to plumbing, art conservation to climate control, maintenance never truly ends. Labor, utilities, and insurance consume staggering sums. And yet, against all reason and history, the lights of Biltmore still burn each night, a beacon of endurance, where almost every other dream of the Gilded Age has long since gone dark. Estate taxes remain a constant threat, the shadow hanging over every new generation. Each succession requires years of careful planning to ensure Biltmore can be passed on without being dismantled to pay the government. Yet, somehow, the Vanderbilts have always found a way. Through the Great Depression, through world wars, through decades when society scorned the Gilded Age as wasteful and obscene, through recessions and shifting tides of tourism, Biltmore has endured when every other house like it has vanished.
What would George think if he could walk its halls today? He would likely be astonished, perhaps even startled by strangers touring his private refuge, by families snapping photographs in the rooms he once called his own. But once the surprise faded, he would recognize what he saw. The limestone gleam of the facade, the stillness of his library, the forests he restored, all of it remains. The craftsmanship, the harmony of beauty and sustainability he dreamed of, still endures, stronger than ever. 1 million visitors now come each year, but they aren't there to gawk at luxury. They come to witness what vision can accomplish, how art, intellect, and devotion can outlast time. They come to see with their own eyes that some things are built not for fashion, but for forever.
Biltmore stands as something unique in American history, the only great estate of the Gilded Age to survive the world that birthed it, not unchanged, not frozen, but alive. It is a monument to George Vanderbilt's imagination, to Edith's unbreakable will, to William Cecil's business genius, and to each generation that chose preservation over profit. The largest private home ever built in America became something George never intended, a living symbol of preservation, sustainability, and family legacy. It survives because every generation has been willing to change everything except its soul. They've adapted, reinvented, and sacrificed all to uphold what Biltmore has always represented: beauty, craftsmanship, and the power of vision. So if you stand before Biltmore today, gazing up at that improbable French chateau nestled in the Carolina mountains, you're not just looking at a house. You're looking at proof that with creativity, courage, and determination, even the grandest dreams can defy time. George built Biltmore to last. Against all odds, it has. And as long as his family continues to guard its legacy, America's greatest mansion will continue to inspire everyone who walks through its doors.